In this video, we're going to talk about what's arguably one of the best designed bottles that's ever hit the whiskey market, and that's the Glenfarclas Pagoda series. So welcome back to the channel everyone, and anyone who gets nervous about me having these very expensive bottles on the cask, this video is for you. But we've got a new addition. We've got a Lazy Susan so that I can show you the details on these bottles, because they're just incredibly stunning but very fragile, if that makes sense. So obviously the first thing to sort of start is like, what is the Pagoda series? You may or may not have heard about the Pagoda series. Well, it's an official bottling of Glenfarclas. As you can see, there's barely any independent bottlings of Glenfarclas on the moment on the market. It's always an official bottling. But this one's quite unique in the way that it was funded. So this was funded from private equity from Asia. So they funded and designed the whole project, and Glenfarclas provided the whiskey and other parts like that. So it's an official release, but was sort of sold and distributed in Asia through a third-party private equity company really over there. Now, the history of the series is quite interesting. The first release came in 2016, and there was the bronze, the silver and the gold. Now, these all had incredible whiskies in them. The bronze had a 1971 43-year-old Glenfarclas. The silver had a 48-year-old from 1967, I believe, and the gold had the record for the oldest Glenfarclas at the time, and that was a 59-year-old 1956 release. So they were really incredible, and that set of 3 bottles, when it came out in 2016, I think it was only about 30,000 for the 3. So it was expensive, but they were very, very high quality whiskies. But that was just at the time of the market when we were just sort of hitting this big infinity curve almost of sort of rocketing prices. So the bottles that I've got with me on the cask today, I've got the Sapphire edition here, which is the oldest, and then I've got the Ruby one that I'll bring up shortly as well. Now, the Ruby Reserve was a 1954 62-year-old Glenfarclas, and then this one, the Sapphire, is the oldest Glenfarclas that's ever been released. It's a whopping 63 years old from 1953. Now, there were various formats of the release. The ones that we've got here today are the silver editions, which means they were part of an edition of 180 bottles. And as you can see, they really are beautiful bottles of whiskey. So before we take a real close look at the bottles, let's take a look at something that's equally important in today's whiskey market, and that is the packaging. Now, you're going to have to bear with me with this because the packaging is monumental. So first of all, let's look at the Ruby release. So the first thing that you'll get to when you get your Ruby release home is this. It's a massive travelling Samsonite style aluminium clad suitcase. So let me just open this to show you why it's designed in this way. Look at that! For over-engineered packaging. Why? So as you can see on the right, you've got space there for the bottle and the stopper, but there's a big space on the left of it. Now that's the reason that it needs such a big case. The reason for that big space is for the other case that this Ruby release comes in. And here we have it. Look at that. Like a piano finish lacquer on the base, beautiful glass panels, aluminium mounts, and you've got a hinge at the back so that when you get your Ruby release home, you can put it all beautifully on display. Now, you can't argue that this is a sensational presentation. It's absolutely amazing, and I think it's one of the best designed packagings I've ever sort of seen. You know, there are some modern releases, specifically of sort of some very modern whiskies from new companies that are trying to sort of compete with this sort of level, but this is just trying to make the whiskey stand out and shine, which is what I think it does. It doesn't detract from the bottle, it doesn't detract from the whiskey, it just helps present it. So there's the Ruby release in all its packaging splendour. Now, the Sapphire release is actually slightly older. You know, it's the oldest whiskey, but it comes in much more understated packaging. I mean, and that's if you can call an ostrich leather case subtle, because it's an ostrich leather skin, or ostrich skin leather, ostrich, whatever the term is, ostrich leather, ostrich skin case, and it's absolutely beautiful. Really understated, really quite subtle. And then you've got a quote in here from John Grant, and then you've got your space in here for the bottle itself to sit in. So this one, if you're looking for a practical, very high value bottle of Glenfarclas, go for the Sapphire. If you want something that's got to just wow everybody that you meet it and give yourself a free travelling trunk at the same time, go for the Ruby. So let's take a look at the bottles, and for this purposes I'm going to go with the Sapphire because this is the oldest bottle from the series. Now let's just take a look at these bottles in a bit more detail. They really are a work of art. Now the designers, I think it was Glencairn Crystal that did a lot of the design and the production of this. So the obvious starting place is the glass, or the glass for our viewers down south. It's 30% lead crystal, which means it's extremely clear, and you can see the colour of the whiskey coming through. We'll put some shots online now, on the screen now, of some promo shoots that we did recently. You can really see how clear this glass is. Now, what's also been done with this, as you can sort of see on the front here, the 63 is actually made up of 36 sapphires set in sterling silver. So, I mean, just bling out, come on, let's throw 30 odd sapphires onto this just to number the age, to state the age of the whiskey. So that's your starting point with it, really. All these other mounts, such as the Glenfarclas branding, the collar up here as well, they're all sterling silver and fully hallmarked. So on the Glenfarclas logo here, you can just about see you've actually got the hallmarks visible on the Glenfarclas logo itself. Now, when you look at the material, the marketing material that Glencairn put out about this, they had to order 11,000 sapphires to get enough of the right quality and colour, because the colour of the sapphires were designed to match the colour of this stopper. Now, this stopper itself is a work of art, fully hallmarked silver base, and actually it's got a magnet. If you listen, it draws itself in, so it's on a magnetic clasp in there. There's a magnet in this stopper and there's a magnet in that top there, so that it stays on a bit more securely. The stopper itself looks like the Doig ventilator, of course, and it's all beautifully engraved, and we've got all the other details engraved on here. This is all engraved into the bottle and then infilled with silver coloured paint. Now, when you move onto the sides of the bottle, you can see that we've got these Chinese guardian lions. Now, this is quite interesting, and this is when I was researching this last night. It was something, so before I set up this business, I was an auctioneer involved in the sale of quite a lot of Chinese porcelain, Chinese works of art. So I thought, right, let's see if we can sort of catch these out, because Chinese guardian lions, they're not just native to China. They're, their use isn't just in China, it's in various countries over in Asia, but they were pretty much a symbol of wealth. They were often outside of a property, carved out of huge pieces of marble, and it was basically a symbol of the elite and the wealth, because obviously to have a huge temple lion or a Chinese lion carved out of a big slab of marble cost a lot of money. Now, there are two, they always come in pairs. You've got the male and the female, which is the yin and the yang. Now, the male should have a ball under its right paw, and the female should have a cub under its left paw. Now, that's right, the attention to detail on this, not only have they taken a symbol of Chinese wealth, or an Asian symbol of Chinese of wealth, and placed it on the bottle, they've actually got the attentions to detail right on this. And that's, I think it's quite important, that really, because what's essentially happened here is that the West has stolen a load of iconography from the East, and we've tried to put it together in a way that makes sense. And personally, I think it actually works. All of this on the side here, you've got the J&G Grant logo here and the age statement on the bottle down here. It all is beautifully infilled with sapphire coloured paint, and again, it all matches the blue on the stopper as well. So we've gone through the Sapphire edition. I'll just bring the Ruby edition up for you to take a look at. And some of you say, do you ever get nervous handling these bottles? Well, the bottle, no. The bottle with the stopper, yes, a little bit more so. Look at how fine that glass is up there. So this is very comparable to the Sapphire edition, except on the front, obviously, it's set with rubies. There's actually one more ruby than there is sapphire. So there's 34 rubies used to make the 62-year-old age statement. So why am I waxing lyrical about these bottles so much? Well, look, come on, let's be frank. Do we care about whiskey? Of course we do. Does the market care about whiskey? Not really. Does it really? Watch our Springbank 1919 video about how the same whiskey in two different bottles can be £250,000 difference in price. The Aston Martin DB5 Black Bowmore edition is £70,000 more than the final edition just because it's in a different bottle. You know, the same whiskey, two different bottles. So clearly the market does care about the presentation of bottles. And I genuinely can't think, get in the comments if you can name any better presented or bottles with greater levels of workmanship on them, because the only ones that I can think of are the Macallan and Lalique. Now, the Macallan and Lalique, they're very nice bottles, don't get me wrong, they're absolutely beautiful. Does it look like you've just spent £300,000 or £80,000 or £100,000 on them? No. In fact, when Sotheby's sold a full set of 6, they had a special wooden presentation case made for them, which actually made them sing a lot better, but isn't actually like OEM. It's not an original part of that series. Now, these bottles, come on, let's be honest here, they're designed at a specific demographic. You know, if you spend £25,000 on a bottle of whiskey, you want it to look like you've spent £25,000 on a bottle of whiskey. And with this, in the case, with the Sapphire, in its case, absolutely looks like you've just spent a whole load of money on your whiskey. Now, compare that to other expensive bottles. Macallan Fine and Rare, for instance. Let's imagine you spent £1.5 million on the 1926 Fine and Rare. Does it look like you've just spent £1.5 million on a bottle of whiskey, or does it look exactly the same as a £10,000 or £12,000 Fine and Rare bottling? It's exactly the same. Now, look, I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. Should you be judging a bottle of whiskey by its cover? It's important. I think it has to be part of it in this society and in this culture that we're in. But to sort of say that, to ignore the fact that people are driven to bottles that are attractive is completely, you know, to ignore that fact is just naive. Look at the folios, for crying out loud. Oh, I've got a metal tin around my no age statement Macallan. Let's spend 15 grand on it. Come on, people. Presentation matters, and I don't think you'll ever get better presentation on a bottle than these. So there we have it. It's the superb Glenfarclas Pagoda series, a series that was privately funded and originally bottled by Glenfarclas, and the presentation is second to none. And also, as importantly, for everyone who's going to hate me in the comments below, it's got stunning whiskey in it. The whiskey is absolutely fantastic, and it's the world record holding highest age statement Glenfarclas that's ever been released. So anyone who knows about whiskey probably has heard the term Pagoda, and they've probably heard of the man called Charles Doig. Charles Doig is pretty much the man. He designed dozens of distilleries in Scotland, and he was one of the most prominent architects for whiskey distilleries in the 19th century. And one of his most famous inventions, so to speak, because we'll come to that in a moment, was what's known as the Doig ventilator. Now, the Doig ventilator essentially sits on the top of the maltings and allows the air to go out, the smoke to be drawn through. Now, he invented this because, would you believe it, if you stick a big fire, a big smouldering fire beneath a floor of barley, you know what, they did tend to set fire a little bit. So Doig's ventilator, Doig came up with a design that allowed the peat smoke to rise through the barley and be drawn out of the top of the maltings in all four directions. So prior to this, you would have like a cardinal's hat type device that would swing around according to the wind, but it was essentially just like a chimney that came out of the top with one in one direction. Doig's ventilator allowed the smoke to come out in all 4 directions, which meant a better draw, so you would get a better smoke and better smouldering from the peat beneath, and you would also get better ventilation going through, which resulted in a lot less fires. Now, the first ventilator that was ever installed was at the Doig distillery at the end of the 19th century. And of course, Glenfarclas had a ventilator at one point, but that was decommissioned in the 1970s, I believe. I can't remember the exact point. But Doig's sort of inspiration for the style of the ventilator was apparently from Chinese pagodas. Now, we say Chinese pagodas, but they're not necessarily just limited to use in China. You find them in Nepal, in Japan, Vietnam, and they're often Buddhist or Taoist structures. And we'll put one on screen so you can kind of see them, but they're multi-tiered, which allows the people to go up to the top. And on the top is you've got this sort of uppermost tier, and it looks a little bit like this stopper here. And that's where Doig draw his inspiration from. Apparently, I don't know the exact references for this. I don't have anything in writing to say that that's what it inspired him, but that's what all the articles that I've read say inspired him. And when you start digging into this a little bit more, it technically isn't a pagoda. What's on the top of all these distilleries? It's a cupola or a cupola, and these were used on hay barns to dry hay. So if you look on the top of a hay barn, we'll stick an image on here, you get this similar sort of device which is open on all 4 sides, and those objects that we call pagodas are technically called cupolas, but that's just me being really geeky, and I'm sure you're not too bothered about that.